So, welcome everybody this September 3rd to Prepare for Change in the Ascension Connection Call. I am so happy that we have Simeon Hine back with us today, Dr. Simeon Hine, whose degree is in sociology. He's the head of the resonant viewing course in Boulder, Colorado, Mount Baldy. Am I saying that? Is that the correct, or do you have multiple places?
Yeah, Mount Baldy Institute is it's now it's a it's a corporation, and Institute for Resonance is a nonprofit.
And then you have, of course, your series of books that you've been writing.
Yes.
Dark Matter Monsters and Black Swan Ghosts. I included some of them in the write up for you. But his interest and travels have had him over in the UK, walking through crop circles and studying the energetic fields and how it affects not just equipment draining your batteries, but there's an effect on people as well. And he's noted that this same phenomena seems to happen with Bigfoot and other entities. So, with that, Simeon, I'm going to let you describe what you do and take it from here.
Well, thanks very much, Kat, and thanks for having me here today. These are really interesting topics, and what I've really become fascinated by, having been involved with this since 1996, and I started teaching on my own in Boulder, with the Mount Baldy Institute in 1997. So that makes 25 years of teaching RV. What I have really noticed, Kat and everyone, is there are some fundamental underlying principles in all of these phenomena that we call paranormal. And that's really what I've been focusing on. And I was really surprised when it cropped up, pun intended, with Bigfoot. Because even if you go back to the early days of Stanford Research Institute, Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff wanted to test whether, remote viewing really worked, if there was such a thing as psychic functioning. And their first test subject was Uri Geller from Israel. Now, if you're familiar with Uri, he does psychokinesis. He's able to, bend metal objects. He's even been able to, there they are. Is that from Uri, Yvonne? Yeah, he can do this with groups over the phone. I've read. It's not just that he can do it, he can kind of create this energy field at distant locations and so forth. And if you know about Uri, he claims that his special powers originated from being chased by an orb in his apartment complex in Israel when he was much younger. And he said that the ball of light, or the orb, chased him through the courtyard, and then it caught up with him. Yeah, so he was chased by an orb. And now this is not as uncommon as you would think. We'll get into this in a moment. I mean, these luminous phenomena exist, and there's a spectrum of these phenomena, from ball lightning to orbs that seem more intentional. It's a very good topic for discussion. But Uri said that the ball caught up with him, and I believe that he was unconscious for a while after the ball of light made physical contact with him. And I was always unsure of this story. I mean, I'd heard him say it, and he seems like a believable person, but a neighbor of his came forward recently, a few years ago, and said that he was on his patio in the same apartment complex and saw Uri getting chased by the ball of light. So there's a witness. In any case, since that event, Uri claimed to have psychic powers from that event. He said he wasn't born this way. It came from that ball of light event. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I've heard him say. And he went further on to say that the ball of light was it was associated with a UFO and a certain civilization that was, around or near Earth. And I forgot the name of this craft and the civilization, but that's Yuri's story. Now, we can't verify whether there's a craft up there or not. At least I haven't seen it. Maybe some of you have, but I mean, he was featured in that documentary Third Eye Spies by Russell Targ and Lance Mungia, which you should all watch if you're interested in these topics. Anyway, the reason I'm bringing this up is because when Yuri was being tested by Targ and Puthoff at SRI, and you can read about this in Jim Schnabel's book and his documentary Remote Viewers, both the same name. They had a lot of strange activity around the lab and in people's homes. You might have heard about this idea of the hitchhiker effect from James Lakatsky, Lakatsky's more recent book, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, also authored by Knapp and Keller, where Lakatsky, a DIA, I think he was a missile analyst for DIA, and gets interested in Skinwalker Ranch and creates OSAP with the help of Harry Reid, which later was known as ATIP, also under Lakatsky. He mentioned that the researchers that went to Skinwalker Ranch, when they went home, they would experience, I guess you just have to call it paranormal activity, cryptids, strange animals, and their family would experience this, and friends of the family would experience this in their backyards and around their homes in suburban Maryland or wherever they were way back in DC. But this didn't start with Skinwalker Ranch. It goes back to Uri Geller, where researchers saw giant crows at the foot of their bed when they woke up one morning with their spouse. I mean, there are multiple witnesses here. Small UFOs flying around the lab. Excuse me for a sec. And aports. You know what aports are, is objects materializing out of thin air. So this, for me, just in terms of my research, and I don't claim to be the only person that knows about this, starts with Uri Geller back in the early 70s. Now, if you watch Third Eye Spies, you can see Uri Geller viewing objects in a box perfectly 10 out of 10 times or 9 out of 10 times. And doing all these things. They filmed Uri doing this. Now, this is before Ingo Swann and Pat Price came on the scene. Now, Uri only stayed with SRI for 6 weeks because he wasn't an American citizen, and the US government had concerns that he might be a security risk. But for our purposes here, it documents that you have RV and paranormal phenomena and cryptids and aports showing up as early as the 1970s in US government funded research. It didn't start with OSAP in 2008. Okay. It didn't start with Lakatsky or Lou Elizondo or any of these other people that we're hearing about now. So for me, getting involved in RV back in 1996 at the Farsight Institute, working with Courtney Brown, first of all, I started out as an open-minded skeptic. I had just, finished graduate school. I had been an assistant professor teaching statistics, and I heard about this idea of remote viewing, and I got interested in it just as, is this actually real or not? Can anyone do this? So I took the class out of curiosity, and also professionally. I sort of felt like I had to know whether this was a hoax or whether it really worked. And I found that it worked. I mean, just for my own results and other people in the class, within day, 2 days, 3 days, people were drawing pictures of the hidden targets in folders that they wouldn't have gotten if they were guessing. I could just tell, as a former statistics teacher, that they were getting more accuracy than you would expect from a null hypothesis, which would mean just random guessing. And that's what Jessica Utz found when she reviewed the RV program for Congress in 1995. In any case, Um, you can see my videos on YouTube about RV and so forth. I'm not going to talk too much about it here. I do have an online class coming up starting next week. If you're interested, you can contact me. But what I found was that there were weird effects on people doing RV, and we didn't know about Uri Geller and his work back then. I hadn't heard about it till much later. We knew about Ingo Swann and Pat Price, but you have to understand, in 1996, the program had only been declassified in 1995. It was a special access program, and the people who were in the program couldn't even tell anyone else about it. They even, if you listen to someone like Dale Graff, he didn't even tell his superiors at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where he was involved in working on the stealth aircraft program, but he was also in the SRI program as a special access program. You know that these special access programs have a horizontal integration. So people above you in rank don't necessarily know what you're doing. And that's the nature of a special access program. So that's how classified it was, is that even other people who they worked in their official jobs didn't know they were doing this. Dale took a lot of heat when his superiors at Wright-Patterson, where he was an engineer in those reverse engineering programs. I forgot the exact name of it. The ones that also probably reverse engineered UFOs. But at the time, what we heard about it was they were reverse engineering Soviet aircraft and creating stealth and so forth. Dale took a lot of heat. I think he actually was fired because they didn't know about what he was doing. So we didn't know very much in 1996 either. So it was a real surprise to me to find that people at Farsight were experiencing orbs and balls of light when they were doing their sessions. Does this sound familiar? They would go home from SRI, from Atlanta, back home, and they would experience strange beings in their bedrooms. One fellow encountered a reptilian, and he was a railway engineer for one of the major railway companies in the US. Believe me, he wasn't into anything really strange. He was the engineer. He was the guy on the train to keep the train going. He experienced a reptilian, then he experienced some gray activity. He even had a sexual encounter with a gray female. And he was really upset about this. And he wrote a letter to me saying, Simeon, what did we get involved with when we did RV? And I actually went all the way down to Tucson to talk with him because he wouldn't tell me any of this over the phone. He's passed on now. In the book, I called him Bob, just because I promised not to reveal his name because he didn't want the rest of his surviving family to know what he had encountered. But doesn't this sound like what we're hearing now with Lakatsky and Skinwalker Ranch and the Hitchhiker Effect, which I'm sure you've heard about? So the point is, this isn't new. It goes with the territory. Now, fast forward to the past couple of years. I did crop circle research that came out of viewing some crop circles at Farsight and wondering what is a crop circle? I didn't even know what these were. So I went over with Ron Russell on a tour in 1997, and I immediately saw strange electromagnetic effects on cameras, batteries, stories from people. We didn't know what made them back then in 97, but we could tell that there were really interesting things happening around them. Even professional camera crews would have their cameras knocked out when they went in these circles. And I saw it the first year there in 97 with Ron Russell's Sony camcorder that he put down in a circle. He didn't turn it off, and it melted on the inside at this power supply. Now, you just see this once, you think maybe the camera failed, but when you see this over and over, you're starting to see a pattern. And he had to send it back to Sony, and they had to resolder the solder joints. They said there was a power surge. Okay, so I've seen this in crop circles. I saw a ball of light in 1998 near a circle, just on the ground for a few seconds, very common, like what people see, blue, like a blue grapefruit. And in 2000, someone photographed one of these balls of light over the East Field while we were doing a meditation with the German researchers Koch and Kyborg. He was coming our direction, just stopped, took a photo. There's a nice ball of light there. So I saw these effects around crop circles, and I've talked about this a lot, and those lectures are on YouTube, and I've talked to your group here about this before. But it was a real surprise once I started looking into cryptids and Bigfoot in as a serious subject. I had heard people tell me about this at UFO conferences over the years. I had seen a few presentations going back to Stan Gordon, who wrote the book called Silent Invasion, the Bigfoot UFO wave in the 70s in Pennsylvania, which is a great book. It's hard for your mind to wrap itself around what's going on there. Because if you're like me and many other people who write to me, they would say, why would Bigfoot be connected to UFOs? Bigfoot seems like something archaic and ancient, a relic primate, bipedal primate or something. And then why would, an undiscovered ape be connected to UFOs? But in Gordon's book, and I heard him lecture about this, and he's still on the scene. You can hear him on podcasts and so forth. You get these phenomena happening at the same time. If you look in the UFO research, and it's something I studied more carefully for Black Swan Ghosts, I encountered so many UFO witnesses over the years. And that's another thing I should mention about RV is you tend to get people who've worked with the government coming to RV classes. And they're partly curious and partly because they have short stories to share and they know they'll be a good audience for them that's my feeling about it, at an RV training class, because people will want to go out to lunch, they'll talk, and these people can tell their stories who they might not feel comfortable, telling not just to anybody, people who worked at NASA, astronauts. So it all starts to build up. And I also noticed when I studied UFO encounters that people had time slips, battery and camera failure. It's part of the territory. There's the NICAP report, Strange Effects Around UFOs, from Gordon Lohr and Donald Kehoe from, I believe, 67 or so. And then I did have some contact with even haunted sites and ghosts because I was invited to be part of this sci-fi pilot episode that we filmed in Cripple Creek, Colorado, at a haunted former hospital that had been around. The building had been there for 150 years, and talking to witnesses in the area who had seen, all of the glasses and plates slide off a shelf all at the same time with force. And you start looking at what happens in those situations. You also get camera and battery failure and orbs. And then this is what they report even now at Skinwalker Ranch. So I got some questions over the years about Bigfoot, and I didn't really focus on it very much because I had in my mind, as Ingo Swann would call a reality box, I had the box that I got from listening to Art Bell back in the 90s. And he had Lauren Coleman on quite a bit in those days. And Lauren Coleman, who's a cryptozoologist, who I think is in the East Coast now. I believed him when he said Bigfoot is a relic primate, undiscovered, rare, that's endemic to Washington State and the Northwest, and there's about 1,500 of them. And I guess, folks, you all know this. If you hear something, even as a kid or as an adult, and you never challenge it, you might actually believe that's true, and you might stop investigating because you believe what you're being told, right? So I really didn't look very much more into it because I just assumed this is a biological entity, right? That's just rare, or maybe even an undiscovered type of human. It almost seems incomprehensible that you could have a type of human alive that we haven't discovered. But it does happen in rare circumstances in the Amazon rainforest. They discover tribes, but these are kind of not tribes that number in the thousands. These are kind of small groups, maybe Borneo, Indonesia, right? We've heard about this, about tribes still even to this day making contact with people for the first time. But that's not something that's a global phenomenon. And it's not something that's widespread like Bigfoot. So I got a few questions about Bigfoot in the past couple of years. I decided to start reading about it. And I heard about other creatures known as dogmen. And I thought, oh, come on, give me a break. Dogmen? I mean, because I'm like you. My mind can only grow so fast. Even being involved in all these topics, we all have a boggle point. At which point you're going to say, I just can't make sense of this. I'll leave it for another day. Like Stanton Friedman would say, the gray box. You kind of say, I heard it. I don't know if it's true. That's how I reacted to Stan Gordon. way back 15 years ago, International UFO Congress in Laughlin. I just didn't know what to make of Bigfoot showing up in the same field at the same time with UFOs or around the same area. And then I think it was a couple of years ago, 2019, I stopped in the Bailey Sasquatch Outpost, Bailey, Colorado. A friend had given me these Bigfoot socks from that museum. And I thought, oh, these are very nice, they're socks. And then I saw the museum when she said you should visit. I thought, why would you want to visit? It just wasn't alive for me. It just shows how behind the times all of us are. Even if you think you're on the cutting edge, believe me, you're far behind reality. I can admit this now because I didn't think about this until I saw the map at the Sasquatch Outpost in Bailey. I went in. My girlfriend didn't even go in. She stayed outside because we just thought it's a museum, some dusty old museum. We didn't think there's any real direct evidence there, just, maps or something. But this map was interesting. It had pins that all the visitors had put in where they had seen them in the area. And some of them were just in Chautauqua Park, a couple miles from my apartment in Boulder. And I started looking into these accounts and I realized it was another hidden event, just like a lot of other topics that sociologists study that people experience and they don't want to talk about, like UFOs, that people would say on the BFRO website, Bigfoot Research Organization, which pretty much lists physical aspects of encounters. It's been criticized for not putting anything in but the sheer physical aspects of the encounter. No time slips, no battery draining, no balls of light and orbs. And when I looked at the map and then went to the BFRO site, and you can look at this for yourself. There is something called the Bigfoot Mapping Project. You could look it up, Bigfoot Mapping Project. They've taken the BFRO site and mapped it to the US. So you can see a map of the whole US and see dots where the people have seen tree structures and heard strange howls or have seen the footprints or have encountered the creature. It's from this movie that is very good. It's been out about 8 weeks, called A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed. It's a very good movie because the last half hour has psychologists and psychiatrists in it who explain not only why people don't talk about the encounters, why they don't remember their encounters, because our defense mechanisms in our mind and our brain are so strong, the physical mind, that we literally delete things that don't fit. Even those of us who might be open to this, you might have an encounter and completely forget about it, which explains why you may know people who've gone into the woods and had missing time, and they don't know where some of the time went. They might have forgotten about it, or maybe something else happened and they had a time slip and entered a parallel reality or something. These things can happen too. But even just at the most basic psychological level, psychologists say people won't remember their encounters. So this is a true hidden event where people don't want to remember it, don't want to talk about it. So when I started reading about these encounters on the BFRO site, people said I didn't want to talk about it for 10 years because it might hurt my career. Kind of, we are all familiar with this, the stigma thing that the UAP task force report mentioned last May when the report came out. Apart from mentioning that, 143 out of 144 sightings that they had at the Pentagon had no explanation, they also mentioned that it's underrepresented, surveyed because people don't talk about it in the military for the most part. I knew a pilot who was in Black Swan Ghost, a civilian and Air Force pilot. He said he knew of a person who was up for promotion, a pilot in the Air Force, and at his promotion hearing, it came up that his wife had bounced a check unintentionally. And he said to me, Simeon, if they can bring up the fact that your wife bounced a check at your promotion hearing, do you think you're going to say you saw a UFO out the cockpit window? I don't think so. So this is what we're up against. So the big thing for me was, once I started reading these accounts, I was shocked to find that people saw balls of light and orbs around Bigfoot, had time slips, space-time distortions, all sorts of weirdness. And that did it for me. I said, no way, this is not a primate and it's not a human. And this is what Igor Bortsev, who's a Russian researcher, he has a Facebook page. I have corresponded with him recently, and I met him a couple years ago. In Bailey, because I started going to conferences they had at the Sasquatch Outpost nearby. They had a conference, and he said he's been in this for 50 years. He's a political scientist by training. He said, first, I thought it was an undiscovered primate, relic primate. Then I thought it was undiscovered human, and now I think it's a paranormal human. And he told us of cases. Now, you have to understand, this is someone that served on the Russian side in Afghanistan in the civilian sector as a teacher. And you have to avoid, obviously, any discussions right now of what's going on in Ukraine, because this will end your conversation with them immediately, because they won't agree with most of our position here in the US. But this is someone that had been in a war zone. This is a hard-boiled person, political scientist, and he told us stories of invisibility from Bigfoot, telepsychokinesis, anti-gravity, and all sorts of weird phenomena around Bigfoot sightings that he had from his research group, where it's a serious subject in the former Soviet Union. In Russia now, they have hominology, where they discover relic. They're interested in relic hominoids, hominids. There's all varieties based on what family tree you're looking at, whether it's just apes, chimps, humans, so forth. But they accepted that there was something real. But he said none of it quite fit because it's paranormal abilities. And so I had a conversation with him recently, and he had mentioned this, but he said that he had, when one of these creatures approached their van, 5 ruble coins flying around the room, large objects levitating, and just a whole range of weird effects. Oh, the van started when there was no battery attached. They might have taken out the battery and used it for something. It started on its own. And this is what you hear about. Why it's not reported amongst the Bigfoot TV shows that we watch and the BFRO site is, you guessed it, those people are concerned that it won't have scientific credibility if they mention the woo-woo factor, right? So the BFRO investigators, like Carter Bouchard, who's written some very good books about this, Bigfoot evidence of an enigma. He goes into case after case where these weird things happen to his witnesses, in his couple books about Bigfoot. And he said that if you report it to the BFRO with all the weirdness, they'll strip out the weirdness. And even the witnesses complained, saying, that's not what I said. And there was more going on. I'll give you an example. Les Stroud, Survivor Man Bigfoot series on TV. He's, teaches survival. He was a former surveyor in Canada, likes the outdoors, started doing YouTube, and he had TV shows and everything. He put a lot of it on YouTube. And even in this bonus episode, he goes to Portland. A woman invites him out to her area, and he hears voices in his head and sees balls of light and goes see a psychiatrist afterwards to see if he's going nuts. People around Bigfoot can hear them talking in their heads. And there's a consistency here with the way it sounds. It's a type of muddy voice or mechanical or computer sounding. If you hear actual recordings of them talking, they can speak English or whatever country they're in. They can speak the language of the country they're in, and it's passable. But it's good enough to imitate your relatives or your dog barking or whatever it is if they're attempting to trick you to come outside or do something else. Little children say they hear them talking through the wall in their minds, telling them to come outside. And there's stories of these kids going outside. They don't disappear. That Bigfoot just seemed to want to hang out with them. So they just said it was like a bear that walked on 2 legs the whole time and could talk into their minds. It's a very interesting subject. So you can see, for me as a sociologist, why this is so interesting. We have the data and evidence at one level, and we have witnesses telling us what they're experiencing. Listen to the Sasquatch Chronicles, which is a podcast that you can listen to on YouTube, and there's a member section, but there's a lot of free audio also from Wes Germer. You can hear these witnesses describe what they're experiencing, and they're not comfortable talking about it again. So this is what we're all up against, folks. Are we dealing with another type of reality here that is so off the charts from what we were told in school and what we were taught, We can't literally talk about it because everyone involved is afraid it's going to hurt them professionally. Now, I run my own company. I can't be fired. I'm already low on the totem pole. There's nowhere to go. It's like the Dylan song. When you've got nothing left, you've got nothing left to lose. Well, I'm not saying that's literally my situation, but I'm saying I've put myself in a situation deliberately where I can't be fired. So I can say whatever I want, and that's what I want to do, because I grew up in a household in a suburban New York area where you just evaluated evidence and you didn't change your story because to be popular, you evaluated based on the evidence. That's just how I was educated. Maybe it's old school, but that's how I was brought up. You don't just try to win popularity contests, you tell the truth. That's my value system. So we've got all this evidence, and we now know that all the professionals involved at the edge of these subjects in the Pentagon, in the US government, and even the researchers themselves, because they want to be accepted by the Pentagon and the US government, haven't told us everything that's been going on with all these encounters. So what does this mean? There's huge amounts of witnesses out there that haven't come forward yet in all these subjects, and we haven't even heard 10% of it. You get a feel of it when you read the NICAP report, Strange Effects of UFOs. Terry Lovelace, good example. Someone I know, I consider him a friend. I just started out by reading his book, Incident Devil's Den, where he goes out one weekend, take a break from the Air Force as a medic, goes out with his buddy to Devil's Den State Park, and all of a sudden it gets strangely quiet. The crickets stop. Now, if you do research, the crickets stop around Bigfoot and they stop around UFOs. It should tell us something that we're dealing with the same sort of energy field or the same phenomenon, because crickets normally are not scared of me or you or anyone else. They don't just stop chirping when I'm around, right? They don't stop chirping when bears are around or moose or elk. Why do they stop chirping around the boss, Bigfoot? It's like, I don't think they know Bigfoot's name. It has to be an energy field of some sort or space-time distortion. It's the same phenomena. They notice this around their tent. They see a huge triangular craft. Terry didn't, and they get taken aboard, and it's not a pleasant experience. They get experimented on and they're burnt. They don't think it was intentional harm. It was some sort of medical experiment. And the triangular craft leaves and they're left in the tent, sunburned and everything. They go back, leave the tent. The Air Force finds out about it. And they are told never to talk about it again. Terry didn't remember the whole thing until he had x-rays at the hospital, and they found pieces of strange metal, symmetrical pieces of objects behind his knee in different parts of his body. If you get Incident Devil's Den, it's a really good read. And he has a sequel where he had reader stories. Same sorts of stuff we're talking about here, all the time loss, the balls of light, the same, it's all the same stuff as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I could be wrong. That's just my point of view on it. He didn't remember it either. And then he's a former federal prosecutor. I mean, he was a attorney general for Samoa or something like this, the chief prosecutor there, a U.S. territory. So he worked for the federal government. And I mean, to tell you how real this is, I was talking with him on the phone the other day, and he said, Simeon, I had to tell somebody. I got a call from the Department of Homeland Security. They want from the New York City Bureau. The top guy there wanted to know about my Devil's Den case. And then when I finished telling him the whole story again, he said, we're investigating these abductions as a criminal activity. And Terry said, I didn't know the US government had jurisdiction over extraterrestrials. And Terry said there was no sound on the other end of the phone. It was silent. And I can personally tell you from having talked to people who know people that work at DHS, they have experienced this themselves. I don't know if James Lukatsky brought it back from Skinwalker Ranch, because they were not going to go for it. You can read Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. They met with Phyllis Green and a whole bunch, and they said, we're a new organization. We're a new intelligence agency. We're the new kid on the block since 9/11. We can't have anything that makes us look weird. Same thing. We're not interested in Skinwalker Ranch because we need credibility. We're a U.S. intelligence agency, and we're new, so we're not going to study. We're not giving you any more funding for your project. We don't want anything to do with you. Goodbye. But I have been told, I know 2 separate cases where people who work there have woken up outside their house in the early hours of the morning without knowing how they got there. Okay, repeatedly. So they're experiencing it too, which is why I think they're probably investigating it. And I'm allowed to say this. Terry said, put it in the book in Dark Matter Monsters. So the final straw here for me was I've always been interested in cold fusion, just purely as an idea that maybe there's things that are real that we haven't heard about because of the vested interests of existing institutions. Cold fusion certainly seemed like something since Fleischmann and Pons did their experiment at University of Utah in '89 and created cold fusion. And Vittorio Violante gave us a lecture at SSE in Society for Scientific Exploration in San Francisco in 2015. He said, we reproduce Fleischmann and Pons. It's real. It's a resonance effect. It's like a musical instrument. It's not chemical. It's not purely electrical. It's like there's a music being played and they all respond at the same time, and it taps into the 0-point field. And it gets more energy than you're putting in. He said, we reproduced it and sustained it for a while. It's not easy to do. And all the other researchers used the wrong type of palladium because it has to have cracks in it for the little hydrogen atoms to cluster. It has to be the impure palladium doped with silver or something. It has to be imperfect palladium, not what you would do in a lab. Let's order palladium, let's order deuterium, and let's try it. You can't do that. So he said it's a finicky reaction, but it's true. I started studying more about cold fusion. I listened to the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, ECAT World, and I started listening to Bob Greenyer's lectures at the MFMP Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, and he started talking about cold fusion being a type of tiny ball lightning based on the work of Takeaki Matsumoto, who we didn't hear about because he was banned from publishing in US physics journals because he mentioned ball lightning. It's another topic where there's stigma. Guys, how far out of touch from reality are we? This is sad. This is a Nobel Prize winning type person who got censored from American Nuclear Society's Fusion Science and Technology magazine back in '93 because he mentions ball lightning. By the way, this is lead coming out of a pure carbon film coming out of a pure lead ball. But because ball lightning creates a type of electronuclear transformation. It transforms, it's alchemy, it transforms material. And he explained cold fusion in the same way Vittorio Violante explained to us and Fleischmann and Pons, which is that it's a type of, nuclear effect that collapses. The gravitational effects are so strong from the electromagnetic forces that it overcomes any repulsion, static repulsion, and you get mini ball lightning. And he even shows us, to top it all off, pictures of black holes that he has found under his electron scanning microscope, a top nuclear scientist in Japan. So we haven't heard all of the story here. Yes, mini black holes. They don't go anywhere. They don't destroy anything. They're just contained by the whole process itself. But this is what propels cold fusion, low energy nuclear reaction. And so Takeaki Matsumoto explained it. So did Alexander Parkhomov, really another brilliant physicist who I do not want to get into a debate about Ukraine about. But in his book, I mean, he's a brilliant guy. But we may not agree on everything, but this is a great book because he also talks about low energy nuclear reaction and relic neutrinos, cosmic background energy, neutrinos that interact with biological systems that have a wavelength large enough to interact with cells and molecules, and also can help sustain cold fusion reactions. So there's a huge body of science that actually shows why this is all real. So now we have a connection between cold fusion, Bigfoot, and crop circles and other paranormal phenomena, which is it's an alternative type of electromagnetic arrangement. And that's what I put in Dark Matter Monsters. This is why I wrote this book, which is just had a few weeks now, and I've really been pleased with the response and that people enjoy the large font size. Thank you, Kat, because it's an easy reader because Bigfoot's a slow reader and Bigfoot needs big print, big books. So this is what I've really been fascinated by, is perhaps what we call paranormal phenomena is literally a type of coherent matter, coherent energy. And we would have like a spectrum of coherent systems or incoherent. we humans would be more towards the end of incoherent because we're individual. We have distinct personalities and appearances and so forth. We have differentiation in how we look. At the other end of the scale, you have ball lightning, which is extremely coherent. All the particles are at the same frequency and temperature, and they become one big electron and a glowing ball. They're not hot. It's cool to the touch. When it goes through something, it will melt, but not from heat, from nuclear reactions, as Matsumoto explains. Ball lightning is not always warm. Sometimes it's cool. And, when you hear about some of these UFO cases, right? Don't people say it got suddenly cold? Or they say this around Bigfoot. Why? Because it's the same process. So to go back to our original question, why would a relic primate have anything to do with UFOs? Because it's not a relic primate. It's some life form that's been around so long that it knows how to tap into the fundamental forces of nature. Things related to cold fusion. I'm not saying Bigfoot's driven by cold fusion directly, but these processes in nature are so fundamental if they're happening in black holes and neutron stars and in subatomic levels, like Matsumoto is able to show with his electron scanning microscope, that you get these black holes and white holes at a submolecular level from collapse, electronuclear collapse, which creates new materials. We're talking about a fractal process, a fractal way of looking at things, that what's happening in the largest scale is also happening at the smallest scale. It's the same processes. It's not just that black holes are way out there. And Parkhomov talks about these small black holes in Space Earth Human. He talks about cases in the Soviet Union where they believe that they came through villages and totally left a trail of destruction right in the path of that small black hole. He said you could see the nails coming off the barns as it moved across, dragging, the thing is dragging behind shingles and nails and things as it moved across. So it's sort of the same fundamental processes. And what we call cryptids are actually life forms that learned how to do this. And the reason we don't know about them is they don't want us to know about them. They like being invisible and stealthy. They're predators. And if you're a top predator, do you tell your prey what you're doing? You don't. I'm not saying they're preying on us directly, though we do have accounts of that. I'm not saying that they're an adversary. I actually have a petition on change.org to give Bigfoot federal protection as some sort of intelligent species. And there are many cases of them helping people and rescuing people in water. You can read about this in all these books you can find on Amazon, Rusty Wilson, Tom Lyons. The Rusty Wilson books are fascinating because they go national park by national park. And they rescue little kids who've fallen in those streams that I've hiked by up there, and people who've broken arms and limbs hiking and just fell down a cliff, and they will feed them. There also can be quite hostile if you're in their territory and they don't want you there. But they're very good at evading detection. Okay. And so what we're dealing with here is some fundamental forces of nature. They're part of how the universe works. And my argument in Dark Matter Monsters, and what I think is going on now, folks, is that there are just other life forms around that figured this out. If you think that you don't think coherent matter is enough to do this, just look at the Lockheed Martin patent from 2021. They were granted it in March 2021, where they talk about coherent matter wave beams. Boyd Bushman worked for Lockheed Martin. He talked about it also. He talked about the relic neutrinos and gravitational collapse. Lockheed Martin got a patent in this to create what? Invisibility, cloaking, and teleportation. So maybe Lockheed Martin isn't the first to figure this out. And whoever figured this out ahead of us, other intelligent life forms, I don't know where they fit on the family tree, but they're related to us in some way, but they may be much older than we are. We may be like the younger siblings or something, which is why they kind of look down on us a little bit. That they already know how to do what Lockheed Martin got the patent for, right? Cloaking, invisibility. People have seen Bigfoot and Dogman move around like a cartoon character, like it's here, it's here. They can run so fast they can keep up with your vehicle on a highway, okay? That is not normal metabolism. That, especially something the size of Bigfoot, that is something else. And it really would seem that They just know how to do this. Now, even 2 days ago on Twitter, I saw Northrop Grumman, another defense contractor. And what did they make a reference to? The shadow biosphere. Shadow biosphere. What does that sound like? Parallel realities, other life forms. So here's what I think is going to happen, and then we'll open up for questions. I know it's a lot of material here, but 25 years is a long time to be looking into this to finally kind of feel like you understand maybe what's going on here. It does seem that we're surrounded by parallel realities, and it's not just theoretical abstract talk. There are life forms that inhabit these parallel realities. And when people see them, I think that's what they're seeing. They're literally seeing creatures and life forms that could be completely in the etheric, that only pop out once in a while, or they may be partly physical. They kind of be hybrids like Bigfoot, like physical etheric combos. And this is why you get the balls of light and around them in your iPhone. I've talked to witnesses, their just camera stops working when they're taking pictures of them and things like this. Your car battery dies temporarily. And when they move away, starts again. So that's not just ordinary electromagnetism. It seems to be something electromagnetic, but not classical. And the Soviets were researching this in the 80s and 90s. It goes back to a very famous Soviet scientist, Zeldovich, from the 1950s, who worked in their atomic bomb program, but was also interested in these sort of subatomic electronuclear collapse phenomena. He called them torsion fields. Okay, it's canceling electromagnetic field that has all of these properties. It's something beyond ordinary electromagnetism. Fortunately or unfortunately, the leadership in the Soviet Union at the time wasn't interested, and they just wanted them to stick with conventional stuff, so they didn't develop it much. But they knew about this in the 50s. It was later developed again in the 90s. People saw experiments, what they called electromagnetic phantoms. These were toroidal, donut-like structures, toroids within toroids, fractal toruses, basically, that they said when you turned it off or even took it off the table, the ghost pattern of the luminosity remained behind. And then you could sweep away the luminosity with your hand. Like it was changing space-time, like what Hal Puthoff calls space-time metric engineering. Right, this is what we're talking about. And I guess what I believe now, my feeling about it is that there are life forms that already know how to do vacuum engineering, space-time metric engineering. I know that's a big shock for humans. We like to think we're the top of the food chain, the bee's knees, the cat's meow, and we're all amazing in our own way. Believe me, I've taught RV a long time. I know people can do pretty amazing things. But if someone else figured this out, they wouldn't be telling us very much about it, would they? I mean, the way humans are, we don't even like to be around each other sometimes, right? Look what goes on in the world. Do you think they want to spend time around us? I think they're probably happy in their dimension or in their space. We're just fine, thank you. And they show up sometimes, like some of the witnesses I've interviewed, where they just show up on your porch and then they're just gone again, or they just appear, disappear. It's a very strange subject, and I think the biggest shock for me is to realize how much we don't know, and that you really should pay more attention when you're out on your own in the forest, in the woods. Just pay attention to what's going on. Don't walk around with earbuds in your ears. You need situational awareness because there's just other life around. And I'm not saying it's necessarily going to be harmful, but as Ron Moorhead, who recorded the Sierra Sound, said, you want to be there when it happens. You want to pay attention if they're coming up and they're going to engage you in a conversation with their samurai chatter, their speech, or whatever. He interacted with them on 9 separate trips in the Sierra Nevadas. And you can listen to the Sierra Sounds if you want to hear what they sound like when they're talking, or they come up to his, the structure. He would interact with them. He now said he's really sorry. He was just imitating them when they were calling at night. He thinks they were trying to talk, and he was just imitating what they're saying, which would have been nonsensical. They probably thought he was kind of an idiot. So, so anyway, I think it's a big ego buster collectively. But that is where I'm at the moment, and I'm happy to answer any questions for you. I do have to turn off in about 20 minutes just because I'm on the road. This is my RV trailer, so I can teach my RV classes when I'm traveling. So I call this the RV trailer. And I have to leave this spot at 15 after. But I'm happy to answer questions until then.
Well, thank you so much for that talk. For some of us, I'm sure we've heard this before, but there's some new names in there that you mentioned, so I'm glad it's recorded. And I like, covering the science, and I see so much overlap into the paranormal fields of investigation. And in reading your book, I'm just before I open it to everybody else, so start raising your hands. Yeah, you mentioned driving down that road and noticing that exit that took you to the Bigfoot research. That so you weren't actually looking for it. So this is what I sent you an article about negentropy, how you are drawn to go someplace that you might not normally go. So maybe somebody paying attention to your thoughts and intentions and led you there because you had been thinking about it and investigating. I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, we were at a gas station and there was a left and a right. And every time I'd been through Bailey, just a few times, I'd gone off to the right, and just a feeling said, go to the left. It was a subtle feeling, but having done RV for a long time, you learn to pay attention to those feelings as a signal from somewhere. I just had the feeling, let's go this direction, and there it was. So it changed my life. Changed my life.
Thanks. Ben
When you
Cat
come to a fork in the road, take it.
might be a reason for it. Yeah. Ben
Yogi
Cat, go
Berra.
ahead. Ben Cat, you're muted.
Yeah, okay, got it. Hello. Hello,
Right.
Simeon. So, yeah, thank you for that talk about Bigfoot. I haven't really been paying attention too much about Bigfoot, but there were some questions that you raised. Yeah, so I would just want to point you in one direction that might help you kind of answer some of the questions about why a lot of this is kind of taboo kind of information. People don't talk about it. I think what we need to ask ourselves is who is really in control of this planet. I think if we really start digging into the truth about who is actually in control of this planet, what is really happening, then you could start understanding, oh, why all this is the way it is and all that. But that's just like a general, like a more general thing. As far as question is concerned, now you said you studied Bigfoot. Now, have you come across information about dragons, whether it's Western or Eastern dragons? Because they have in mythology, slightly, they have different physiology. And on the physics side, have you come across information about tachyons?
Right. So last question first. So tachyons, there's a very good presentation from the APEC group recently. Was it Travis Cisco Taylor gave them a presentation a couple of weeks ago at the APEC channel on YouTube, APEC, where he talks about tachyons and magnetic monopoles. Magnetic monopoles, we won't go into it here, but it's something that Paul Dirac predicted in the 1930s based on his interpretation of quantum mechanics that turned out to be the only way they could make sense of all the theory they had at the time. Particles that are magnetic in one direction only have a north or a south, not a north-south. Every magnetic you've encountered has a north and a south, but this is more like electricity where it just has a flow. And Taylor showed that these tachyons might be responsible for why trees become magnetized that have UFOs hovering over them. And it could be why we see strange magnetic phenomena, compasses spinning around crop circles too. But you don't just need tachyons to do this. Anywhere you get these charge clusters, I should mention Ken Shoulders, another researcher worked with Hal Puthoff at SRI. Same idea. You get these exotic vacuum objects, charge clusters, electronuclear collapse, you create magnetic monopoles. So there's a couple routes where you can get to these magnetic monopoles, and tachyons are one of them that Taylor talks about. It's interesting that it's starting to converge a little bit, I think. Again, the strange effects around UFOs. You wouldn't think that wood could be magnetized. It can be, but then it fades away, which is what we found around the crop circles too. Same phenomena, right? You normally think wheat is magnetic. I mean, it's kind of an insulator, but it can become electromagnetic temporarily. So the question about the other cryptids, I believe that there could be many types of these cryptids. I'm in an area of Wyoming at the moment where I talked to someone at a hot springs, and she said she had talked to Crow Indians just up the road here who said they had seen thunderbirds in addition to Bigfoot. Now, if you look at research about thunderbirds, like pterodactyls. They shouldn't exist anymore, according to what we believe about evolution, but people report them, not very often, but they do report them sometimes. And this person said that these crow natives had, I'm right near the Battle of Little Bighorn, where Custer met his doom, and the Crow Reservation, and they report these creatures out there. Now, Dave Paulides thinks that part of the reason you get more Bigfoot and cryptid activity around reservations is because the Native Americans, it's part of their history, it's part of their culture. So perhaps these cryptids feel comfortable around them because they're accepted and they're not hunted. The way people who don't know about them or just react with total fear. Paulides' books are quite good. One is called Tribal Bigfoot and the other is called The Hoopa Project. And it's a very early investigation, as far as I'm concerned, in just what are people experiencing around these reservations? Just what are the witnesses saying? He's some excellent drawings in there what these people have drawn, but they also encounter other cryptids. So the dragons could be part of that too. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Venkat. Hey, Rob, go ahead.
Wow, it's a lot of information. One question I have is Bigfoot and various other creatures like this, they tend to be geographically in sort of very similar areas. What is it about those parts of the world that lend themselves to these sort of phenomena? Why is it I can't open my back door and let one in?
No, it's a very good question. They do walk into towns here in the US, small towns. They do come up to the edge of cities. It's something I've thought about a lot. They're not just confined to forests. They're seen in deserts. They're seen in Arizona. They're seen in every state in the US, including, I've heard witnesses talk about them in Hawaii. It's often believed they're not seen there. People have said they've encountered them up in the mountains and stuff. So Ron Moorhead thought they might actually have something to do with trees, because he said there was a time where they got very close to the sound, where the sound was coming from, but they couldn't see anything, and they couldn't even get any farther. There was like a force field, which Katsky mentioned something like that in Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. So my belief would be, and it's something to do with fractals, that they need to be an environment which is sufficiently fractal, because their energy form is kind of based on a fractal geometry structure, branching structures. We're fractal too. That's just my idea about it, why they're so often associated with forests and trees, and yet they don't have to be there. I mean, they're seen around nuclear power plants too. It's very curious, right? So I think it has something to do with what makes them work and why they would stay in an environment that sort of is energetically, if they're able to generate their own exotic vacuum objects, their own charge clusters, even just from liquids, their feet moving on the ground. Charge clusters are created anytime you get compression of matter, earthquakes, tectonic plates, but it can be created by you walking across your rug and touching a doorknob. You won't see it, but it's there briefly. But if they're sustaining themselves from a power source like that, or using it in some way, they would need to be an environment that would sustain the exotic vacuum objects and so forth, as Ken Shoulders called them, charge clusters. Yeah, that's my idea about it, but it's just an idea at this point. It's a good question.
So it may be something to do, because I mean, previously I've heard talks from, I think it was Rory Duff, who talks about ley lines and things, and he's of the opinion that it's the movement of the ground which creates compression, and it's effectively acoustic waves that from compression that give us all these sort of weird phenomena. Effectively, things like Stonehenge is on a ley line, and he basically goes around dowsing for these effectively waves, very low frequency.
You're going to get this around stones and stone circles because of compression and the way the matter is packed together. But what we've learned in this research is there are no boundaries here. It can come from acoustic waves, but it can also come from a type of physical pressure. There are particles called polaritons, which are a type of particle coming, I think, from sound waves. You can find almost every particle be an interface between sound, electromagnetism, and other types of energy, piezoelectric effects, as someone has mentioned, Kat has mentioned here. There's a comparability between them. They're not like separate subject areas like I used to think, like how would you go from sound to electromagnetism? Because they all generate a pressure. They generate waves. And at some point, these waves can compress enough, they can be energetic enough to turn into particles. You can even take it as far as quantum mechanics. So there's a commensurability, that's the word I was looking for, between different forms of energy. Cymatics is a good example of that, right? How sound becomes shape and so forth. And you can see, yeah. So Ernst Chladni, the discoverer of cymatics back in late 1800s, early 1800s, late 1700s, he showed that sound and other types of energy, he created the original waveforms just from his study of sounds and putting violin bows on a metal plate with sand. So there's some commensurability here, and I would imagine these cryptids are tuned into this in some special way. But this is why you see orbs, balls of light before earthquakes and so forth. Because there's intense tectonic pressures building up. And if we could do it, if we can find a way to sustain it, you can just create a lot of energy. I mean, it goes all the way down to the vacuum field, the quantum vacuum field, if it's a fractal structure. This is what the Soviet research showed. Even Dave Freiberger at Stanford Linear Accelerator Center wrote a paper that I just saw recently from 2004, where he showed that, a fractal arrangement and alternate ways that electromagnetic fields, kind of alternate interpretations of Maxwellian dynamics, can create what he called, I'm going to use his own words, a type of matter that can overcome and transcend physical matter, that has huge amounts of energy available to it, that literally can penetrate ordinary matter and do all sorts of interesting things.
Very interesting.
Yeah, he called it diality inversion, and it's just part of Maxwellian dynamics. So there's other ways that why we don't look at this more as a society. I'm not sure what the fear is. We're stuck in this kind of classical mindset. It doesn't have to be that way. I mean, you have these researchers showing us fractal arrangements, ways that you can get resonance with materials and really sustainable chain reactions of materials that would not only produce energy, but produce materials, with a very kind of basic natural principle. So.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. I think resonance is a very non-linear, and you get all sorts of unpredictable,
right,
sort
exactly.
of weird.
Non-linear. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Very interesting. Thanks. Someone did ask about APEC. I forget what APEC stands for. Alien. It's APEC. If you can't find it, I'll send the link to Kat for someone had it in the chat here. So.
Yeah, Dave asked that question. Thanks, Rob. That was a really good question. And we just realized how much we don't know, even listening to you, who questioned your own knowledge. There's so much that we don't know. So, Jeffrey, I know you've got a really good question.
Yeah. All right. Hey, thanks for that talk, Simeon. Really, really interesting. I have a question, actually, two quick questions. First one's very quick, and has to do with the crop circles. And if you've done any dowsing in the crop circles, noticing any three-dimensional structure to it. Freddie Silva talks about that as he dowses, and he finds many additional formations that appear versus the actual design that appears on the ground. Have you done any of that work?
Not much. I usually, when I've brought groups over there, and with Ron Russell's groups before I was doing these tours, we would have Busty Taylor and Maria Wheatley, who were two dowsers in the Wiltshire area, who would show us around and show us. We would go to Stonehenge with them, and they would show us how the dowsing rods would move, and around the Avebury stone circles. So it's something I've done. I haven't really focused on it a lot, but it's the same sort of idea, is that your body is a detector, and it's detecting fields of energy, even non-classical fields, and it's signaling to your autonomic nervous system, like CRV, coordinate remote viewing. Yeah, that's the theory behind CRV. I think it's like these are very closely related to dowsing, because it's not that, in my belief, that the dowsing rods, they're just picking up the signal. You're picking up the signal, but the dowsing rods are, you can see if they move a little bit. I had some friends up in the Northwest that were looking for water, and they had a conventional water company come out, and they paid them $10,000. They said, we can't find any water. They really wanted this land, so they wanted to develop it. The bank wouldn't give them a loan until there's water. So they hired a dowser. The guy took off all his clothes. He was an 80-year-old guy, took out his oak dowsing rods and found a gusher in 20 minutes. True story.
So yeah,
So it's
dowsing.
you're picking it up, and there's we can't literally see the structure of the crop formation. We measured it with the static meter. It's almost like a dome or something, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
good question.
Yeah.
So we have time for
So that dome, when you recognize a 3D structure, I mean, people talked about having, really intense feelings in certain crop circles, and then the other one's very light and easy to absorb. So I guess, the takeaway is, do you sit in the crop circle? Do you, stand outside the crop circle to get the best healing benefit? And
yeah, they're all different. It depends. They don't all feel the same way. Some don't feel great, some do. So it's just a lot of variation.
yeah,
A lot of
cool.
variation.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I think we got time for one more question.
One more.
Ben, or
I'm going
comment?
to hit the road.
Okay. Go ahead, Ben.
Yes, thanks, Simeon. Really,
Thank you.
indeed, very amazing talk. For me, the whole topic of cryptids before this week was entirely unfamiliar. Of course, I've heard about the legends and the myths, but I never looked into the spirituality behind these things. So this week is like, and when I saw that you were coming to talk about it, I also knew that in a video or like a YouTube channel that I'm following, it also has like a playlist on this topic. So I thought like maybe I'll research a little bit ahead of it, and then maybe this week can be in the theme of cryptids, and that's working out pretty nicely. My question was in regards to, did you also look into the history of these things? Because on that YouTube channel, it has like all these amazing old drawings and paintings and visuals from old civilizations and like suppressed history, stolen history, that shows all of these kinds of cryptids, and it's really interesting to hear those myths and those kinds of things. Did you?
Yeah, no. There's all sorts of mythology and lore about giants. It's just causing me to reevaluate right now. I'm just like you. What was your name again? Ben. Yeah, so I'm like you. I mean, I'm reevaluating. Maybe this is really, they've been there, the giants. The Vikings encountered them 1,000 years ago in Newfoundland. They said they were huge. They howled. They smelled really bad. It's just what people report. I think the smell has something to do with sulfur. It's what you would get from nuclear transmutation. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but there's reasons for that. But they encountered them, and you go back to, any sort of ancient history, you hear about these giants. Now I'm starting to think maybe it's not mythology. Maybe this is all real. And I can tell you how close and far away this is. I had a friend who I hadn't seen in 10 years who I studied RV with at Farsight. I had only seen her once in 20 years. She visited me while I was writing Dark Matter Monsters and went back to Arizona thinking, Simeon, and she said, I didn't tell you this time, but that's not for me. Like, I'm not into the cryptid thing, okay? And it's interesting, but it's just not my thing. But her family had a vacation cottage up in northern Arizona, and she started noticing the tree structures, which she said she used to think they were made by Boy Scouts, but she never saw any Boy Scouts. The tree structures started coming closer, and she started touching them. And she said she started seeing the creatures around the area. At first, she thought they were just dark shadows, but they stood up. They were very tall. She saw footprints. It had been around there the whole time, she told me, just the past couple of weeks. She didn't want to see it. Her parents had just said it's just normal forest activity. The strange sounds at night, the weird smells of wet dog smells. It's just this. And she believed the intellectual alibis, the rationalization. And all of a sudden it became so real to her. They sold the place. they couldn't handle it. It went from not being real to being like a really scary movie really quickly, to the
Right.
point where they didn't want to be around the property anymore. I'm not saying that to scare you. I'm just saying these phenomena could be close enough, but we're pushing them away in our minds.
Yeah, exactly.
Me too. I'm just like all of you. Okay. But it could be because you don't want to think about it. There's a variety of reasons. So perhaps in mythology, the same way. It's something that's been there the whole time, and we were just taught those are just, don't worry about it, Junior. Those are just stories. But I'm going to read you a bedtime story, but it's just a story. But maybe it's not just a story. Maybe it's there.
Mhm.
So it just means that we need to reevaluate a lot of our assumptions about reality. And me too, because we don't know what's going on. And I think that's better. It's more exciting that way. It's a little unnerving to think that you should pay a little more attention when you're out in the wild with a group or by yourself. I mean, you need to be paying more attention than you were, just in a neutral way. But
it also definitely makes life a lot more exciting.
Yeah,
and
you
like
feel it. You're gonna feel it all of a sudden.
Yeah.
You feel alive.
Those
You
kind
don't
of
know
things.
what's going on out there anymore. You don't know what's going on.
Like that's really an amazing experience every time that happens, when there's just like this whole new aspect of your reality that you were completely unaware of. And indeed, like you say, by just allowing it in your mind to accept it, it will manifest. You will start to have these kinds of experience. So
Yes,
that's fingers crossed. Let's see what
there you
happens. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And I shared one link in the chat, the playlist of the myths and the history for everybody to.
Oh, okay, thanks. Well, folks, thanks. I wish I could stay with you another 15 minutes, but I literally have to move my vehicle right at this moment. So I've enjoyed
Very
it.
much.
Let's do it again soon, okay?
I would love that, and I'm sure most people here would like the same. And do I have permission to share your email with one of the gentlemen? Jeffrey was asking.
Please
He's
do.
got an electrical question for you. I know you don't have time, so.
Please do. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Talk soon,
Have fun
folks.
out there.
Okay. Bye for now.
Catch up with you soon.
Amazing. Thanks, everybody.
And everybody else, we're going to hang around a little bit. I'm going to stop recording. Or did you start recording, Ben? It stopped and restarted, so I was assuming it was you.
I didn't touch anything, no. But it's still going now.